2027 is not a real year. Jason has just informed me that he has some students that will be graduating in the year 2027, and I don't think that's true. I don't think it's real. That doesn't sound like a real year. Welcome to Lines and Spaces. My name is Micaela, and this is Jason. We're going to talk today about general music. So whether that's something you're already familiar with or you hear the term general music and you don't know what it means, we're going to try to kind of define it and give a broad overview of what it is and what we have learned through teaching it, through watching people teach it, and our philosophies on it. So general music broadly has a purpose of exposing students to various styles and functions of music while also building basic skills and foundational skills in music making and understanding to enhance lifelong participation in music.
Yeah. And kind of going off of Michaela's point there, it also it's a weird category because it isn't in the same category as like band, orchestra, or choir, like those core like music classes that are, I guess, nowadays performance focused, where you learn an instrument or you learn about the voice and you perform a concert type of thing. It kind of encapsulates everything else besides that. So like music technology or music theater at times, where you learn about theater or music history or music theory, all that kind of falls within the term general music. But in some classes, you'll just call them music class. Like if you ever had like an elementary school specials class, like an art
Mhm.
class or music class, it kind of falls within that, where you learn a broad envelope of what music is and you interact with music in different ways. And of course, as you go up into middle school and high school, you may have more specialized music classes outside of band, orchestra, and choir, or even jazz band and whatnot. Like music production or podcasting has also been a class that I've seen around a lot. Like we're doing right here. Yeah.
We even there's some national standards that we could call upon to give a basic idea of some of the things that tend to be covered in a general music class, which are creating, performing, connecting, and responding. Those are the national standards for music classes. Um, so, Jason, I would love to know what have some of your experiences with general music been, and what's worked for you?
Yeah, so in terms of general music, coming in to Temple and like their music program, never had any like thought of what general music was and was like. I was always just assumed it was like that boring side of music class because I was not super excited to learn general music when I was very young because it just wasn't as like enthralling as like band or orchestra at the time when I was learning it. But after going through it, I've learned that it's a much different field than what I originally perceived it as. And then going on from there, my general music experience, actually like hands-on teaching it, has primarily been in like the middle school setting, both through my student teaching and just working with students in that age group. And then of course elementary, that I've also had to do in student teaching. So definitely more middle school focus with some elementary like general music to kind of back it up. And in terms of like what I do in those settings, younger kids, a lot of movements, a lot of singing, a lot of learning the foundations of music like rhythm, pulse, and like solfege singing, or being able to identify like what do you call them, tonal centers, resting
Yeah,
tones is another way of putting it.
resting
And
tones,
for
like
and
tonality, keyality,
yeah, and then for
like the
and
key that
like
you were in.
yeah, and then for in terms of like the technical terms around those methods like Kodai, Dalcroze, MLT, or ORF, like those methodologies definitely more focused in the elementary level
And
of
those are all basically theories of how music should be taught.
yeah.
So, in case that's not something you're familiar with, basically, um, what Jason just listed are different ideas of like, this is where you should start. This is the order you should teach something, and this is how you should teach something.
Mhm.
And I think for a lot of educators, I think I could probably speak for Jason and myself both in saying that we use a mix of a lot of different theories, depending on the classes we have, the children that we're teaching, what they need, how they learn best, and like calling upon a lot of different theories. Um, in different situations so that they don't have to be exclusive.
Yeah, and like you learn, so if you decide to go into the music ed field, you learn about all these different theories and these methodologies of teaching and approaching music. But later on, I think as Michaela mentioned, you kind of take and pick and choose which ones work for you, and then use it as like a toolbox to approach your classroom, and you kind of pick and choose what works, what doesn't work based off of that. I recognized more and more that younger students, a lot of times it's just echoing is very important, like having them listen, repeat it, and then kind of build upon that. That type of idea is always more beneficial. Like oral learning without any written notation is the approach that I always kind of go with, and it's worked a lot with. And then going on from there, you start introducing note reading, but still not like it's not like looking at the entire staff and anything. You're like starting one at a time, having them clap out rhythms, having them sing solfege, and then having them like do rhythmic chants along with those things, and then using a bunch of like short tunes to learn about different tonalities, or just being able to experience different tonal centers and key centers in general. Um, but yeah, I guess I'll throw it to you, Michaela, just in terms of your experience in the general music realm. You've done a lot more focus work with that than I have in terms of like actual hands-on experience.
Yeah. I don't know about a lot more, but like I know that I've definitely, of all of the parts of music education, I've had more experience in general music settings than I have in choir or certainly in band or orchestra. Um, so something that Jason just mentioned about echoing and oral learning uh, reminded me of something that I learned from one of our professors, one of my favorite professors from Temple, um, just talking about how little humans develop, like how children develop and learn, how they learn language is through a lot of um, repetition. So they'll hear something and then they'll repeat it type of thing. So that echoing is a really natural way of learning for especially for young children. So oral learning, as Jason mentioned, makes a lot of sense for younger students. My experiences have mostly been with elementary general music and junior high general music. And similar to Jason, I had a very limited understanding and view of general music before actually getting to teach it and learn more about it in college. So it's much more broad and vast than I believed it was. It covers so many topics, and it basically, in my opinion, is just teaching the language of music to students with all different levels of understanding and um, skills that have been practiced up to the point when you start that class with them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with that. I think Michaela, I think what we're kind of also talking around is the idea of like higher order thinking processes, like Bloom's
Yeah,
taxonomy,
definitely.
that whole if you ever seen that the pyramid that's like broken up with like
Mhm.
terms like create, evaluate, and analyze, basically how individuals develop higher order thinking. A lot of times that is the foundation to how we approach teaching because you want to teach in a way that also influences how students think and how they're thinking at that current like age group. Of course, this is all very broad and nothing is an exact science with all this because each individual student is unique in their own way, how they understand and how they learn best. But I think going off of both of our points here, general music, why I've kind of learned to like enjoy general music more through my own education of it is that it is so flexible in how you can like approach it. Like there isn't one right or wrong way to do it, and you have a lot more freedoms to how you're teaching those classes because there is no right or way to do it. Because at the end of the day, your evaluation and your assessment of the students is based on their response to you. And I would like to say most of it, such at younger ages, is more informal response and kind of assessment. So you're not looking for any like concrete, like they're not gonna write you back a paragraph of what this song, how the song made them feel or like whatnot. But you're approaching it from a way of like a more looser term, and the whole goal, like Michaela had mentioned, is for students just to enjoy and live within music, and just kind of play around in that space for a little bit within your class. And then, of course, as you get older and through different grades, you start adding on more things, getting more project focused maybe, or learning about more exact musical terms, and so on. But kind of going off of now talking about our experiences in general music and and I was gonna say in general. Um,
And overall,
yeah. We also throughout our time we have written a lot of lesson plans and we've made
a
a lot
lot
of
of lesson plans
activities
so
in those
far.
settings. So Michaela, I guess just in kind of thinking about the broader sense of writing up these type of lessons and planning out these activities, what are some things you're looking at when you're planning out like a general music activity?
Yeah. So I still haven't found my best mode of lesson planning. I kind of am still experimenting with a lot of different ways to go about that. Um, but something that I try to pay a lot of attention to is pacing, having enough activities and enough things in my back pocket where if something doesn't take as long as I thought it was going to, I will still be able to engage students in a meaningful and musical way during the class. So pacing is really big. Advice that was given, I think, to both Jason and myself was to have an activity planned. If you're working with 6-year-old students, have 6-minute activities planned because frequently younger students focus for about as long in minutes as they are old in years. Um, and just being able to have not only an appropriate pace of content being given during the lesson, but also pacing in the way that you're moving in a unit or in a semester, in a year, whatever that longer measurement might be. Being able to make sure that you're going back and reviewing things enough in the longer term. And something else that I try to pay a lot of attention to is varying the entry points that I'm using to engage students. And by that, I mean, I might have a lot of auditory learners in a class, but there also might be a lot of kids who learn visually. And so finding ways to engage them more visually than auditory at first is really important. Um, yeah, and like just finding as many ways as possible for students of all different levels of understanding, ability, and skill to engage in the music. So if there's a student that is really struggling, if I could find a way to engage them just by tapping the beat somewhere on their body, that's a meaningful musical engaging activity for that student. Just finding some way for them to participate and understand and be part of music to set them up for success, to go from here to grow wherever the end point is, as long as there's growth. That's my take on lesson planning for now. There's not a lot of specifics because I haven't found them yet.
No, yeah,
Jason, how about
very
you?
yeah, very understandable. And with lesson planning, it's always gonna be different for whatever environment you're in. But something that's like worked very well for me in terms of kind of lesson planning and thinking about how we lesson plan is always like Michaela said, approaching it from multiple points and also presenting it in a way that a lot of students who have different types of learning styles or preferences of how they kind of consume consume knowledge or think about things is always important. So having an auditory thing along with the visual, along with maybe like a written thing or like a planned out type of activity is always important. And in terms of like activities for such for younger kids is varying those activities out. Like I'll in like a given class, if I remember for like younger students, I'd have like 5 activities planned out to kind of progress through and transition to because like Michaela said, 6 minutes for a 6-year-old. It's always a good rule of thumb to keep your activities kind of quick moving with younger learners because their attention spans are usually a little bit less than older students. So keeping that in mind that your activities should flow and move quickly and that your transitions should move you into the next activity.
And
So
not to say that you can't like dive in longer with something, but being prepared to not be able to dive in for a
mm,
longer amount of time has proven to be helpful.
yes. But in terms of like the lesson planning in general, I mean, always planning out your goals and your objectives for that day and how you're gonna assess them, because those objectives are gonna plan out how you're gonna approach your lesson. Like if my activity were rhythm based and I knew the age group that I was working with, all of my activities would be focused on rhythm, but in different ways. So you might do a movement activity that has them pulsating or flowing in a given time signature or in a given beat behind a certain type of music. And then we might start clapping parts of the music and using chant syllables. So you're doing a movement activity and listening, and then you're transitioning into using the same song but adding in chanting and clapping. And then you may have like a break in between that's like another transitional period for the students maybe to draw something in front of them that is related to rhythm and beat, and so on and so forth. So your lesson is still grounded within rhythm and beats and thinking about that, but you have three different activities that kind of pull on different muscles and different thought processes that the students are going through so that the students are constantly being engaged and constantly thinking about what they have to do, because if they're thinking about that, you have less downtime for them to get distracted and start thinking about something else. So those are always some like good like kind of like rule of thumbs for general music lessons for younger groups. And kind of going so now from that placement level of kind of lesson planning to like the middle school side of it. Middle school, you have the students are older, the thought processes are a little bit more complex. They can engage in some more meaningful and thoughtful thought process and conversations. But again,
And
you
it's
always
also
want to
like it
sorry.
could be no, you're fine. It can also sometimes be a little harder to engage students at first as they get older in a general music setting, for so many different reasons that we don't have to dive into right now. Um, but figuring out how to connect to the students first, figuring out where music is in their life, and then bridging from them to like how they can understand the music they listen to more and things like that in student teaching. I know very little about hip hop, and that was the first lesson I got to teach at my student teaching placement at a junior high was about hip hop. And so, because that was a little bit a lot of the students were listening to, so a lot of research in my experience goes into general music overall for all ages, but a different type of research for upper grade level general music. Jason, please continue.
Yeah, no, and yeah, going off Michaela's point, yeah, definitely meeting with students where they are, especially as they get older. Like, if they don't feel like you're with them or like you're teaching them something important, they probably aren't always going to give you the full amount of attention or want to be engaged in class. As they kind of, you know, start having independent, start thinking independently and want to like have their own kind of pathways. Something always just to keep in mind is how you can connect with them. An activity that I did was kind of like kind of having them suggest music to me, and then we would listen to some of the music that they enjoyed in class, and we would talk about it. And I always found that to be very, a very good way to connect with them, because I think Michaela and I both echo with this, that music is something that we all kind of engage with, like throughout our lives, whether that's just listening to music, actually playing it, whatever. Students have that same idea. Like everybody listens to music, no matter what it is. It is still music, and they enjoy it, and they relate to it in some way, shape, or form. And being able to understand that and listen to that from the student's perspective and talk to them about it gets them engaged and gets them kind of on board with you, so that you can start doing other things in the classroom that may not be super focused towards them, because you've kind of given them that you extended that hand to kind of help them, and then now they trust you enough to kind of let you lead them to learn the larger vast world of music that is out there.
Like helping students to see how music is relevant in their lives. Um, yeah, before trying to teach them something entirely new, because
Yeah.
it's good for them to get to know more styles of music or more aspects in the world of music. But if they don't see a purpose to it,
Yeah.
it's not meaningful learning.
Yes.
Um, and there's one more thing I wanted to throw in about the specifics of literally planning a lesson. Jason mentioned objectives before, and advice that was given to me in student teaching was to, while creating objectives, to be very clear. This is something I struggled with, to be very clear in my own mind of what I wanted the result to be, what I was looking for, at the end of that class? Did I want the students to be able to perform something? Did I want them to be able to articulate something that they have learned? Whatever it was, to know in my mind exactly what I wanted them to be able to do at the end of the class, and knowing how to assess it, not in a way that's necessarily teaching to the test, but so that I can be clear on how to approach um, facilitating the activities or helping them to understand the information better. So having the objectives and also knowing how you're going to assess, whether that's formal or informal assessment throughout the class. Thank you. That's my talk.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess the most crucial thing, I guess, in kind of talking about lesson planning is having a clear set of goals and how you're gonna measure or record said goals, whether that's formal, which is like an actual concrete written measurement of the student's understanding, or informal, kind of you're just collecting it on the go type of thing and making note of it. Those are also important. And kind of why lesson planning is very important for general music is because you're covering a lot of information usually in general music classes. Of course, as you once you kind of get in the older population of students, those become more focused because you can. I think more classes are kind of popping up that are like tech based, that are music tech based, that kind of still fall in like the general music kind of category, or like production based where students are learning different things, or even just thinking or just like talking about music has become more and more of a thing, like music appreciation classes or like music history classes and whatnot. And just with it being such a large umbrella of content, having those clear goals and like clear objectives are super important because the field is so large and you can only get so much done within a given class length of time, whether that's a semester's worth of time or a quarter worth of time in the classroom. So always keeping that in mind, especially when you're planning out these things, how much you can get done, what's your end result, what's the end project for the semester or the quarter, and leading up to that point is always kind of like the goal. As well, not always the goal, but a great way to think about it because you're you're keeping it really simple. You're not like going super far, which you could do with a lot of the topics that we're talking about, and kind of going away from like lesson planning. And kind of just talking about this is something that I've always been curious about is like what is and we talk about this a lot about like the purpose of kind of general music and the purpose of it within our classrooms because like I think both me and Michaela have mentioned, we both came into school to learn about music education not having a good understanding of what general music is. And like I even said, I thought it was like a boring type of thing that you just kind of if you're in music class, you're just kind of there. Like it's not as fun as like band, orchestra, or choir. It's
Yeah.
not as engaging and whatnot. But after learning more about it, it's become one of my favorite things to engage in because it is so kind of open. And I was curious, Michaela, if you kind of had that same type of impression on it.
Yeah. I mean, because it can be treated in a way where it's taken less seriously because it doesn't have it frequently, not always, but frequently it's viewed in a way that it doesn't have performance aspects. And so it's harder to measure in a way that's concise and specific the growth that can happen in a general music class. Now, there's plenty of ways to have performance in a general music class. There's like different percussive elements. There's orff instruments such as like, you know, the barred instruments that you might have had in your own experience in a general music class as a student. Um, and like ensembles like that. There's boom whacker performances. There's all types of different things. People get really creative. Um, but I think we've already kind of touched a little bit on like our own, well, a lot of it on our own personal beliefs on general music and what we think general music as a class and as a topic is. My philosophy overall is for music education is that music is a language, and that is something that everybody can engage in some capacity. Um, and so general music is a way to sometimes expose students to music who have had very little interaction, musical interaction. It is a way to deepen the skills and understanding of students who maybe identify themselves as musicians. It's a way to communicate as a group, as a class, as a community with each other, and to stretch the ways that students can express themselves and their understandings of the world around them and the world further than like immediately around them through
Mhm.
different world music and things of that nature. Um, yeah, so overall, I think that general music is a way to equip students to be able to be part of their community, to be able to express themselves, to understand other cultures, understand their own cultures, and to be able to participate in music in the long run. Kind of like how in gym class in public school, like we were taught line dances because they said, well, eventually you'll be at a wedding or something and you'll be able to be social and dance, like you'll be somewhere where you'll need to know how to dance in some capacity. But music is something that I think every human being has the ability on some level to participate in. And general music is it can be the start, it can be a furthering of understanding for students to grow in their ability to do that, to participate in music.
Mhm. And I completely agree with all those points that you just made. It is like music, like you mentioned, is a language that everybody can engage in some way, shape, or form, like we both had mentioned. And kind of going off of what you've mentioned about like general music and the philosophy around it and why we view it as what it is I think it's because it's starting to kind of change. Like we had mentioned, like from where we started as musicians being very young and where it is now is very different than how it could be. And I think that's a good thing that we're expanding upon it and kind of growing in terms of what general music could include, and it is introducing students to a wider like array of what music can be to a wider audience of students, and it allows students that maybe don't want to play an instrument or they don't want to sing to be able to participate in music in a meaningful way that was not once like thought of as like a way to engage students in music. And of course, as music education becomes more accessible and more kind of widespread around the world, it's something that can be used to connect communities of people and connect you even to your own community and so on and so forth. And even just as a way to help students in social emotional learning, music is very crucial and a very integral part to social emotional learning to allow students to express themselves and learn through music in that way. And then, of course, with music, it also kind of opens up different avenues of diversity, equity, inclusivity, which is a term that we've used a lot while we were both in school, more in present day, and it's become more and more prevalent as we've kind of grow as individuals. That students have to understand and learn. The more that you can expose students at a younger age in music, in world music, it gives them a better chance of understanding what kind of music they want to make, what kind of music they want to engage in, because they're exposed to it and they're like, oh, that's really cool. And that was something that I kind of picked up on, especially in my teacher at Temple. My tuba teacher plays a lot of Yiddish music, which I had no idea of what that was until we went to a world music class and
Mhm.
we were given the opportunity to participate and kind of listen to that type of music. And it was so fun because you're just dancing and you're listening to music and you're hearing instruments that you never kind of heard played in that way, in like a setting with a bunch of people. And music, I think we both mentioned, is a great way to connect people and build community because that's where it came from originally. It's just like a way to people to come together around like the old fire pit of sorts and kind of just dance and just have a good time. And I think general
The old
music,
fire pit.
yes, I think general music kind of opens up that avenue of just connecting more people together, learning about people from their culture and their aspects of their lives that we don't get to see in like a kind of a first person viewpoint. And
Mhm.
yeah, what better way to learn about different people and their culture and their musical taste than by experiencing music and by listening to the music that they engage in on a day to day. It's a very similar thing to
Yeah.
food. I like to think about music in terms of food.
I had somebody just say that the other day. Somebody was trying to describe different pieces of music as different types of food. Like yesterday, she said, "Sing this the way I feel this piece is like blueberry muffins right out of the oven. Sing that way for me." Uh, but anyway, um, that is a broad overview of general music, what Jason and I have experienced as teachers very early on in our careers. Um, yeah, so hopefully this was helpful for you to hear. Maybe you learned something new. Maybe it was just kind of nice to hear people with similar experiences or different experiences. That's pretty much everything I think we have for today.
Yeah, and
Um,
like Michaela had mentioned, very broader review and kind of opens up avenues for us to discuss more once we learn more about the
yeah.
world of general music. And of course, we'll continue talking about general music, and it's large. I mean, it's vast. There's so much information that goes into general music that we could talk about it for hours and hours. But it allows us, again, this episode allows us to open avenues to explore different parts of that world, maybe bring in different people. And of course, once Michaela and I both get more situated into our more professional lives as full-time teachers at different positions, we'll learn and gain more knowledge, just like everybody else who's listening, who is either if you're a practicing teacher or a pre-service teacher or somebody who isn't a music educator but enjoys music. Just keep on learning, keep on taking things one step at a time, and just like put yourself into settings where you aren't comfortable professionally in, just so you can get a
Mhm.
taste of it. Because then you can take what you've learned and kind of put them into your kind of your daily roster of things. Which is something that I've learned more and more is I'm taking a lot of things that I've learned and putting into my toolbox to be used, and then once I get into the actual classroom, I can rearrange that toolbox to work in different ways. So always keep that
Mhm.
in mind. I think that's one of the biggest things from an educational standpoint. The importance of general music is that it gives us this large toolbox that we can pick and choose from to approach our classes. So those are my kind of final thoughts here.
I
And
think we pretty much got everything there. So
yes,
that's all we have for today.
yes.
Um, keep on musicking, and we'll see you next time. And 2027, I still think is not a real year.
Yes, and going off the point, so we will be taking a mid-season break for a little
Yes.
bit because Michaela is doing busy things, and we are slowly getting back into our performance lives and both our professional lives. But we will be back, so stay tuned for all of that. And thank you for listening. Bye.